Hi, welcome to In Air's Kitchen. I'm just going to make sure this is broadcasting, which I think it is. Welcome. We are on day 2 of our week on bread. Yesterday we talked to Richard Bourdon and we started our starter. We started our starter. We'll come back to that in a few minutes. But today we're going to make a really simple yeasted loaf, and I just wanted to get started right away on that. And Blue, did you want to help at all with this? You can? Sure. So we're going to do this yeasted loaf. And the ingredients for it are going to be very, very similar to what we did for the pizza dough. So we're going to go through 2 different yeasted loaves. Today we're going to do this one. It's very, very simple. This is something you would make in a few hours of total prep time and maybe about 20 minutes of active time. So this is a pretty quick loaf. This is similar to the very quick pizza dough we made a couple weeks ago. And then next week we're going to do another yeasted loaf, but one that we prepared the day before. And so that one's going to take over 24 hours of total time, but active time is also going to be about similar to this. That one will have a little more chewiness, a little more flavor. It'll be more like a French bread. We might make baguettes with it or something like that. So those are 2 types of yeasted loaves that we're going to make. Today that we're starting off with this very simple yeasted loaf right here. And these ingredients might look very similar to you to what we did when we did the quick pizza dough, because it's almost exactly the same thing. The steps are we're going to mix it up and knead it. We're going to let it ferment for about 90 minutes. I'll just write that in there. 60 to 90 minutes. We're going to shape it. We're going to proof it. That's another 60 to 90 minutes. And then we're going to bake it. And that's going to be like 30 to 60 minutes. I know that's a wide range, but we'll talk a little bit more about that later. So those are the steps we're going to do. I thought it's okay if you're in karate suit, you're putting on a shirt. Blue and Violet are doing karate from home. They take karate at Callahan's, which is an awesome karate place if anybody's near Bedford, Massachusetts. And they are doing a little distance karate thing while we're stuck at home. So, so these are the steps for the yeasted loaf. This is pretty simple, and you should all be able to do this at home, or you can follow along if you would like to. Let's get started, and we'll just start at the beginning of this. So we're going to just start with doing this. Blue, do you want to help with that?
Sure.
So let's get the scale up here. So this scale, now this scale is going to be tared out with this bowl, and then we're going to put in 500 grams of white flour. So you want to do that? And we talked a little bit yesterday about baking with a scale. I don't think there's a lot of equipment you need in order to bake bread at home. And the ingredients are really simple. You need flour, but you really do need a scale. And these scales aren't very expensive. This kitchen scale is probably about a $15 scale, and it works great. But it's going to help you out a lot. It makes it faster to do the work. It's more accurate. It's more fun. So keep going. All right, so there we are, 500 grams. Nice job, Blue. It's like on the nose. So that's 500 grams of flour. And now we want to add some yeast to that. And we're going to add 8 grams of yeast. So just got to bring that up to... No, not quite. It was at 502 before, so 510. Perfect. And now we'll tear it out, so it's at 0 again. We have to add a little bit of salt to this. So we're going to need 8 grams of salt. You want to try and add that? Just take some in your hand and just go ahead and add that on there. When I was learning to make bread, I used to put the yeast in water with some honey or something and mix it around and let it bubble up. And some yeast you have to do that, but most of the yeast you're going to buy in the store and instant yeast will work fine. Just put right into the bowl like we're doing here. Nice job. All right. And now we're just going to mix that in a little bit. Okay. Just distribute it, and then we're going to put the water in. And what I would do here is I might just take a second vessel. And the reason I'm doing this is like in case you overshoot the water, it's really hard to pull it out. So this will let us get the right amount. We want 350 grams. This is a 70% hydration. This is similar to what we did with the pizza. It's not very different. We talked a little bit yesterday about what bakers mean by hydration levels. So, so this amount here, the water, is 70% as large as the flour.
350.
Yep. 350. Yep. Nice. Oh, a little bit more. So, sure enough, we went to like 365. So I'm gonna pour some off. See, if we'd done that into the bowl, we would have been stuck with it, right? Let's try again. Just bring it up to 350. And the recipe is going to be pretty sensitive to this hydration level. Once you get really used to making doughs, you may even eyeball this yourself and just get it to the consistency that you like. You want to get a wooden spoon there, Blue? I find myself doing that a lot when I'm making doughs. And actually, when I came up with your recipe for that quick pizza dough, I never used a recipe for that. And so the morning before we did the episode, I had to make pizza at home and just measure the amounts that I'm used to putting in. And it came out to about 75% hydration. So you see this, there's water in here with the yeast, the salt, and the flour. And I'm just using the spoon because at this point it's just a big mess and I want to keep my hands clean of that mess. There we go. And so as I mix this gently, it's coming together into a dough. All right, so this is coming together into a dough. And now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to get my hands a little bit wet in the sink. So water is your friend when you're working with stickiness. It can help keep the stickiness off of your hands a little bit. And now I'm going to knead this a little bit. So my technique is I'm grabbing a little corner of it and I'm knocking it down with my knuckles. I'm grabbing a little corner of it and knocking it with my knuckles. If I go quickly enough, it won't stick to me. But I'm just giving this dough a nice knead. And you can see it's coming together. There's still some, it's like pretty well mixed at this point. And I'm just going to keep going with that. And it's sticking to my knuckles a little bit, so I'm just going to rinse them and get them wet again. You want to try it a little too?
Yeah.
Get your hands, get really scrubbed. Put some soap on them, okay? Alright, so I'm just going to come in and knead that. And you see this is a kneading technique where I'm kneading it in the bowl and I'm turning the bowl. So I knead it, I turn the bowl, I knead it, I turn the bowl, I knead it, I turn the bowl. Now if you have a mixer, like I do right there, you could use that instead to mix this instead of doing it by hand. You can also take it out of the bowl and you can knead it on a surface. And here you want to, if you're doing this, it's a similar kind of action. So I'm kneading it down, I'm turning it, I'm kneading it, and I just sort of slow that down for you so you can see. I'm kneading it, I'm turning it. What I'm doing is I'm creating some sheets of gluten, and those are going to develop as we let this sit. So that dough is all kneaded, it's all mixed. I didn't spend a really long time kneading it, but that's totally fine for this dough. That's about all it's really going to need, and this will rise up really nicely. You want to do a little bit? Go ahead, you can try some, Blue. This is sort of fun. I think almost always when I'm kneading it in the kitchen, everybody wants to jump in and join up a little bit.
I also like splatting.
All right, so let's set this guy to bed. So I'm gonna go ahead and so what I'm gonna do, the only thing I'm gonna do, Blue's doing an awesome job with the kneading. I'm just going to create I'm tucking the back side down and I'm creating a nice sort of common sheath there on the top. And that's going to act as the balloon that's going to hold it as it blows up. Now, that is the kneaded bread. And on this show, I didn't, that takes 90 minutes. That took me, 3 minutes to put together? Now it's got to sit for like 60 to 90 minutes. I didn't think there'd be any way that people would want to sit around with me talking for 90 minutes while we waited for this. So I actually pulled us out of real time, and I have some dough that is in the next stage of this. So we just did this stage right here, the mixing knead stage. Now we need to let it ferment for 60 to 90 minutes. And so this next one I'm showing you has already done that. And now we're on to the shaping stage next, okay? So this little ball, these were exactly the same. When this started like that, I know it doesn't look like it is, but that is what it was. this started exactly like that about an hour ago. You want to go put this in the proofing box?
Sure.
I think there's room in there. Okay. Now, again, I'm going to get my hands a little bit wet. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to shape this and I'm going to put it in a loaf pan. Actually, before I get my hands wet, what I should do is I should butter this up. You want to do that, John Blue?
Sure.
So you want some sort of fat that is solid at room temperature. So you could use coconut fat. You could use, this is a Earth Balance, this is sort of like margarine. You could use butter, but you want something that's solid at room temperature that's going to help release your bread when it's done cooking. And you want to get every little corner rubbed with the butter or whatever it is you're using. If you have a metal loaf pan, it probably works better. At least that's what Richard's told me. I'd like to get a metal one and try it. I just have these like meatloaf style Pyrex pans at home, and so that's what we've been using to make the bread. The nice thing is you get to see the bubbles on the side, which is pretty cool. So Blue's doing a really good job getting all that butter in all the different parts. Now what we're going to do is I'm going to take this dough out and we're going to shape it to put in there. And I'm going to show you guys how this works. This is something we're going to do. Some, you can come in. Hi, sweetie. This is something we're going to do with other breads and other doughs. So it's a pretty simple shaping method. We're going to do some similar things in the future. So I've got this giant pillowy thing.
Will that fit in here?
Yeah, it's hard to believe, huh? I'm going to reach under it, okay? I'm going to reach under it with my hands, and I'm separating it gently from the side. And what's happening is those bubbles are collapsing, but the cavities that made those bubbles are still here in this dough, and I want to preserve that a little bit. So I'm going to put a little bit of flour down here, just a little bit, that I can put this down on. And now I've got this wet side up toward me. And what I want to do is I want to fold this over. In the end, I want something that's the same size as that, okay? So I'm going to pull this out a little bit on the sides, and I'm going to tuck it over. Then I'm going to pull this side up a little bit and tuck it over. And then I'm going to sort of create a little bit of tension and roll it into that seam. And now this way, I have a nice sheath of dough that's going to help capture that air as it comes up. And there we have our loaf ready to proof. So that's the step right here, shaping. We're now done. This all goes pretty fast. Next thing it's going to do is it's going to proof. So this is like 3 minutes of active time, wait an hour. 3 minutes of active time, wait an hour. And that's how the baking works. So if you're home, it's really great and not too hard to do. You can have this bread up in no time. This isn't really that different from the amount of time it took to make that fast pizza dough. It's just that we're going to take a little longer in between. So Blue, you want to go ahead and put that in the proofing box. Now, when I'm saying proofing box, I have this box over here, which my sister and my brother-in-law gave to me, and it's awesome, and it keeps a nice humid, warm environment. But you don't need this to bake at home, but it is a convenient thing for me to have. There we go. And what this is set at is lets you set this at temperature. I've got 82 degrees, and it maintains humidity in there as well. And that warmer temperature speeds up all the action. And so what that allows us to do is to have a little better control of how quickly fermentation's happening, so it's a little bit faster at that warmer temperature, and also we have a little more control. You can do it without this. Things will just take a little longer, so that's fine. So this might take 45 minutes in there, and if I just left it out, it may take 90 minutes. And I'm using that right now, so that maybe by the end of the show we can take a peek at it and see it have moved a little bit. The other thing you can do is if you want to simulate a proofing box at home and you don't have a piece of equipment like that, there's a pretty inexpensive way to do it. If you've got a cooler, you can get a cheap styrofoam cooler, or you could have like a Yeti cooler, any kind of cooler. You can have a whole range of how expensive this cooler is. You can put your dough in there and then put some boiling water in an open pot and then shut the cooler. And that boiling water is going to create a steamy, warm environment that is going to be just what your bread needs. So that's an easy way to do that. Now we're going to do the next stage, which is bake. So I've got one of these loaves. Now the problem is I tried to time this so that this would be perfectly proofed for our show. But it's going crazy. So I thought I had it just right, but it's getting bigger and bigger. And this bubble is something new. It wasn't even there when I looked at it last time. So this is really, it's really funny, isn't it? So this is proofed further than we would want. So it's a good thing for you all to see. This is overproofed, and it's gone longer than we'd like. But we're still gonna bake it. It's gonna be delicious bread. Yeah, we are. So I'm gonna score this.
What happened if you cooked it?
It would get bigger and bigger and pop on its own. I'm just giving it a little direction for it to yeah, I'm gonna try and tuck those sides in just a little bit. It just got a little too big. Now this would have been perfect to bake 30 minutes ago, and I saw it. I was like, uh-oh, it's like ready, but the show wasn't ready yet, so I didn't want to put it in the oven yet. So we're gonna have a slightly funny looking loaf, but it'll still be really delicious. You can see some of the bubbles in the side of it. Gives you a sense of what to expect. So there's some areas with some larger bubbles, and there's some areas with smaller bubbles. We grease this with butter just like we did the other. And then when you're doing this, you can, sometimes people used to put cream or butter or milk on top of the dough that can give it like a golden brown color. We're going to use a method today where we have a very hot oven. This is at 500 degrees right now. And I've got it on convection. If you've got that ability, that's nice to do, but you don't have to. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this bread in this really hot oven, and I'm going to do something else. I'm going to create a steamy environment in there. And I'll talk a little bit about why in a moment, but first let me just focus on getting this done without hurting anybody. So I've got boiling water here, I've got a cast iron pan there. I'm pouring the boiling water into the cast iron pan, all right, and it's steaming up, which is just what I want. I'm going to go ahead and put that in there in that very hot oven, and I'm going to let that steam continue. And so that's not something you have to do. If you couldn't do that, you could go into a dry oven. What's going to happen is the crust will get dry, and so it might sort of break over on the side and have a seam. It may not rise quite as high. Another thing you could do is you could have a spray bottle, and you could spray in there and bring humidity in there to help let that crust rise and keep it moist while it's rising. Or you can do what we just did here with the cast iron pot. You can use a frying pan, something like that. It's really hot in there. Pour boiling water into it. But if you have a professional baking oven, they have like steam jets, blast steam in there in the early stage of baking. It keeps the crust moist enough while the bubbles are expanding, so that you get a nice loft in your bread. And so this is a way to do that at home. But as we've said before, we're here to make things, we're here to have fun making food, and you know, that was pretty funny, wasn't it? So I think that bread's given us enjoyment already. And we're also not expecting these to be the same kind of results we get from a professional baker. They have totally different equipment, totally different setup, and they've dialed in all of their process to be exactly the same every time. Now in a home kitchen, we're not going to have those benefits, but the other side of it is we get to do things in, you know, in the privacy of our own home. Sometimes we're wearing pants, sometimes we aren't in the kitchen, and we also get to do things with our kids, and we get to try out different things and experiment. And so those are all things we're not going to get when we get a loaf from the grocery store. All right, let's go on now and just take a quick peek at those that are proofing, and then we're going to move on to talking about the starters. All right, so you can see here, you got a question? Just hold on to that for a second. So you can see here that loaf is already starting to rise. This is what happened to me last time. It went so fast. I wasn't expecting it was going to go so quickly, but it's already rising really fast.
Time-lapse video on it.
Yeah, it's like, well, this one's so fast, it's hard to even catch it. You might need like slow-mo cam. All right, and so Violet's got a question. Shoot, Violet, what do we got?
Could you proof the bread using an oven that turned off with boiling water in it?
I have not tried it. You could probably do that. I don't know that you really need to. I mean, this bread will proof at room temperature probably, I mean, at 70 degrees it won't take longer than 90 minutes. It may even go faster. At 65 degrees it'll probably take less than 2 hours. So I don't know if I would do that. And if you're proofing in the oven, you can't be preheating your oven to get ready to bake the loaf. So I'm not sure. I mean, you probably can do that, but I don't know that you really need to in this case.
There's another question that just popped up.
Yeah.
Could you also add mix-ins
Could you add mix-ins?
Like-
Yes, we could have added mix-ins. So I was like almost thinking it'd be fun to do that a little bit on the show today, but I thought we should just keep it really simple and build on the foundations, and each recipe just have it self-contained. But we may make like an oatmeal bread later or something like that, which would be really fun. But today we just kept it really simple. You know, if we just wanted, say, oats on the top of that loaf I just made, we could have sprinkled oats on the table here. And we could have put the dough down on that and rolled it. We would have had those little oats on top, or seeds, or anything like that. We can also mix things into it. But we're just going to keep this really simple for right now. A lot of sandwich loaves are made with dry milk or even fresh milk, and we didn't use either of those things here. So it's a little different that way as well. It's going to make a really beautiful loaf. It's going to be great for sandwiches and slices, but it will be a little bit different than the loaf you might buy in the grocery store. A lot of those loaves are going to have some of these other things added in. And this is a very simple one, as you saw. So I'm going to take a peek at this. I'm just sort of see where our loaf is right now, and you can see it's lofty, which we expected, and
Oh my god,
and
it's gonna be
it's a monster, huh? We haven't been cooking with white bread much, so it's a little bit different experience. The whole wheat doesn't quite go like that, and we also haven't been using commercial yeast. So these are some of the benefits. White flour makes you feel really good at baking compared to whole wheat, which is like very unforgiving. And the other thing is commercial yeast. It just goes crazy, is what it does. With that said, let's talk a little bit about natural fermentation, and we want to check in with our starter. And I thought we could bring Richard on, so let me just check. He's going to join us here. Just check in on this. Okay. There we go. Sorry, Blue just noticed I hit the mute button by accident when I was trying to show Brooke what to do. So I was just going to say, we're going to have Richard on for a couple minutes. He's going to dial in at 4:30 is what we're expecting, so pretty soon. And I'm just going to ask him a little bit about what's going on at starter right now. Let's take a tour of the starter. So yesterday we made our starter, and I'm hoping some of you might be following along at home. What we did, this is the starter right here we made yesterday. So this one here is at 24 hours, this is at 72 hours. So we'll come to this in a minute. But this is the one we made yesterday, about 24 hours ago. We used water and wheat, and we used two different kinds of wheat. We used a white flour and we used a fresh whole wheat flour. There's other ways to make this. Blue, please don't play with that. It's really, 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 really sharp. Okay. So that was a scoring knife, which I'll show you guys later, but I just don't want Blue to cut himself while I'm describing this over here. So this is the one we made yesterday. You can see the bubbles get going already, which is pretty fun. So you see all these little bubbles forming, like that's a little bubble right there, and there's a little bubbles right here. Those bubbles are a sign that there's activity in there. So there's little guys at work, little guys and gals, little yeasts and little microbes playing around in there, and they are digesting some of the carbohydrates in there, and they're generating some gas when they're doing it. And the reason we're seeing that gas is it's being captured by some gluten that's already there. And then this is not ready yet, but let me play with it a little bit so you can see what it looks like. Now, I don't know if you guys saw, I don't know how many of you were here yesterday, but this looked really dry. It didn't look anything like this. So it's changed a lot over the 24 hours. This morning I played with it at least once. And you know, this is a fun opportunity for you to get a feeling. We're not making this into a bread directly, so there's not really anything you can do to hurt this. And it's a nice opportunity for you to get a feeling of what it feels like to touch a pretty wet dough. And so you see it's a little bit sticky. See how it's pulling away? It's a little bit elastic right now. So this gluten is developing a little bit in this stuff. I'm gonna make my hands a little more wet again. And it looks like Richard's on. Awesome. Okay, so what you're gonna do now is you're gonna go
Maybe.
this one and this one. Cool. And take that off.
Can you hear me? I can't. I don't know if you can hear me, but I can't hear you. I can see you, but I can't hear you. I don't know if you can hear me. Can Can you hear me? I can see you, but I can't hear you. Okay.
All right. Okay. Did you see Richard yet?
He's here.
He's there?
Yeah. Oh, now he's gone.
Okay. Okay. Is that
Aha. All right.
is it working this time?
Yeah. 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 It's working.
Okay, excellent. Sorry. I've been doing this for a couple of weeks now, Richard. And every time I have to deal with
Uh-huh.
something like this, you wouldn't even
Okay.
know I have an engineering degree. But
No boy.
so all right, thank you for joining us.
Hmm.
I just wanted to talk to you a little bit. We're looking at the starter now, and
Right.
oh, hold on just a second.
That was.
There.
Okay.
All right. All right, Richard. Sorry, I'm back. Blue, will you go
Uh-huh.
turn down the oven to turn it down to like 325? Thanks, buddy. Okay,
I see. Okay. Go ahead.
so we've got a starter from yesterday that we got started, and yesterday it looked like a dry lump, and then we left it, and now it's looking really different. And I think some people are following um, uh,
Hmm.
at home. So do you want to just, and there's some bubbles in it now. Do you want to talk to
Hmm.
people a little bit about what's going on in there? What are we hoping is happening, and how should we imagine this in our minds?
Okay. Well, what's going on right now is that you've created a social gathering place where there's plenty of food and there's some water. And bacteria and yeast are, there's basically you have a big neon sign, everybody's welcome for dinner, and they're just all jumping in there and doing their thing. And in the beginning, there's kind of like pretty much anything they try to establish themselves. So in the process of consuming, they're also reproducing and creating, because right now there's an environment, there's enough food for everybody, but everyone is trying to, at the same time as they're consuming, to create an environment that only they would be favorable in. So the bacteria in particular, they generate lactic acid, and this lactic acid serves for two purposes. The one is to, break down certain anti-nutrients that they encounter in foods, like phytic acid that we spoke about, and also to create an acidic environment that only they can live in, that they can preserve themselves in. So in this first phase now, in the first 24 hours, 2 days, everybody is just, just, can you hear me? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. So, so basically, that's the reason why we started with a kilo,
Yeah.
because we wanted to create a big enough, just enough enough nutrients so that there's time for the culture to establish itself. Many formulas they describe to small stuff with a small amount, and what often happens is that if you run out of food before the culture is established, then rotting bacteria come in, and rotting bacteria don't need an invitation. They kind of like the cleaner, like when there's too many
Hmm.
broken beer bottles, they just came in and finish the rest. And once they're in, you can't get rid of them. So that's
Okay.
why I start typically encourage people to start with this larger amount. So right now, what you're seeing, there's an equal. I don't know, depending on your environment, your
Yeah.
home, yourself, there'll either be difference of everybody, but eventually it'll sort itself out, and then we will end up with a culture which is always ends up dominated by bacteria,
Okay.
provided there's enough food and for that to be able to take place.
Yeah.
There will always be yeast, but the kind of yeast that are going to be living in there are yeast that are kind of symbiotic with bacteria,
Okay.
and as in they don't compete too much for the same food.
Yeah.
And like for instance, and also these are yeast that are, that like the grain environment. Like you'll see a lot of formulations where they'll actually encourage you to mix water, flour, and also some grape peels or grape juice, or
Yeah.
and then the problem there is that it works well, except for the fact that you're introducing a yeast that typically likes fruit.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
then now you're putting it in a grain, and like anything else, if there's nothing else to drink, there's
Yeah.
only
Yeah.
Budweiser to drink. Well, you'll drink it, right?
Uh huh.
Until somebody comes in with a nice, Corona or something. God knows, and then and then you'll switch. So typically, what happens when you work with fruits and stuff, that eventually the fruit juice will get kicked out because they'll just dissipate because it's not really their preferred environment or
Okay.
food, I should say.
Hmm.
So we're on a good journey now. You're keeping this somewhat warm, I'm guessing. What are you working at room temperature, or you're encouraging a little warmth?
Yeah, mine is at room temperature. So,
Okay,
and it's about, that's 60, 68, 69 degrees.
right.
Yeah.
So, it's probably wise to just work at room temperature. The thing will happen. It'll just take a little longer. Because when it's warmer, typically things go faster, especially in the bacteria world. When it gets too cold, they kind of like talk like this and move a little slower.
And
Hi,
Richard,
honey.
if
Hmm.
it's getting, it looks different. It's more like soupy
Hmm.
than it was yesterday, and it's getting more stretchy.
Right.
You want to talk a little about what's happening that people are seeing there? What's going on there?
Well, just from sitting, the gluten has now been hydrated, and I'm guessing this was a dough that you didn't mix very much. You didn't do too much
Yeah.
dough development.
No.
Okay, so there was just an incorporation of water and flour,
Yeah.
and as time goes by, the gluten will make some bonds, and it'll become more elastic. And there's also gas being introduced to it, and the gas causes also a an expanding effect, and that also helps the gluten to form. But there'll come a time where as the bacteria keep eating and the
Uh-huh.
acidity increases, where the gluten will actually start to break down.
Okay.
And but at this point, we're not too concerned about this because we're just trying to create ourselves a culture. And as you will see, and as you've done, in a day or so, you'll start refreshing a portion of this because you're not
Mm-hmm.
going to throw this out. You're going to
Yeah.
use this as a spontaneous sour grains, which is a perfectly legitimate way of eating grains.
Yeah.
You'll be able to make a pancake with it or an injera type bread or something cooked on the griddle, little spots cooked on the griddle, which would basically be the original form of bread because the original form of cooking was obviously a hot rock or some
Yeah.
form of a griddle. So, we could say the oldest form of bread would be like injera bread or even oat cakes from the Gaelic people. And
Yeah.
actually, like an English muffin is probably one of the oldest form of bread, maybe even older than the Egyptians,
Hmm.
whatever bread they had with kamut.
Uh-huh.
And because you can ferment anything, Gaelic people ate oat cakes, but
Okay.
no matter what grain it is that you eat, it needs to be fermented. So what you're
Yeah.
seeing there right now is just the very beginning,
Yep.
and what we've then further developed. Like we didn't invent anything, we just was just kind of elaborated on a theme, just like you take a piece of metal and then you bend it this way and that way, and then you
Yeah.
get this and then you get that. So once you're going to get a culture, like after 2 days, 24 48 hours or so, right,
Yeah.
you'll be able to take a portion of that and then start refeeding that just on its own, and then it'll just become more and more active and then you'll, like we shared some formulas, and then you'll
Yeah.
be able to create a loaf of bread.
Well, we're on the way to a loaf of bread. One more thing
Hmm.
I thought might be interesting for people to hear a little bit from you. So I think when I first started making sourdough breads, I learned methods where I had a little jar with a sourdough starter. Like you were saying, I started with smaller amounts,
Right,
but I also fed it all the time.
right.
And then I was worried about keeping it alive. And I think honestly, the first 5 or 6 times I tried to do this, I made dough, I made bread once or twice, and then I was trying to keep it alive, and then it would die. And
Hmm.
or I was told I could put it in the refrigerator. But is this is a little different than that in terms of how we're approaching, because we're not starting with that little amount and we're not feeding it all the time, but are we going to have to keep it alive next week? How should we think about that?
Well, actually, the good news is that I just was working with my son this week, and he actually had a little lump of starter that he made 2 years ago, and it's been
Mm-hmm.
in the fridge for 2 years,
Yeah.
and it was kept in a small jar, and he had just made it into a little drier form dough, like not a liquidy, not a
Mm-hmm.
liquid form, but he just dried up the dough, not dry, like just a firm dough, and he had it in a small jar, like a baby food jar. And it was in the fridge for 2 years, and I just told him, well, give it some water and flour, and sure enough, just 24 hours later, that thing, after two feedings of
Mm-hmm.
replenishing, this thing was the bomb, and it started making bread immediately. And so sometimes what I hear so often, I think what would cause the starter to go bad is if it's not mature enough by the
Mm.
time you put it away.
Yeah.
Because if it's kept too young, when I say too young, I mean where the bacteria culture didn't take hold enough,
Yeah.
then you still have an environment that invites other things. And if at any time where it's too weak, then rotting bacteria will always, they never miss an opportunity. And
Yeah.
then to put it that way. So once we get a good culture, and I worked with you to do one form, which was to just dry it completely, like inoculate just dry
Yeah.
flour and just keep that just on your counter. Or like my son did, had a little piece of dryer dough that he kept in his fridge for 2 years. I mean, 2 years is a long time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then it came back alive. So if you're interested in baking, gonna be that low, then
Yeah.
whatever.
Well, we'll play around with some different
uh,
things. We'll have a lot of fun with it. I hear little chicks. I can't tell if they're mine or yours.
yeah, these are mine, and they're actually. I have to move them tomorrow. They're getting big now, and they're starting to eat the side of their cage. I guess they
Uh-huh.
think it must be the eggshell. So tomorrow's the day. I got to give them more room because look at that. They're getting to they want to try them wings. God,
Yeah.
I wish I
Yeah.
would. I wish I would grow wings. Isn't that amazing? That's just
They
and
they
they're
grow
trying
so
them out.
fast. I mean, it's They grow
So
so fast. Yeah.
actually, once we're done with this, I'm actually gonna go into. I have another little shed, and I'm gonna set a small area in there, and then the job is gonna be to move them over there one by one because now they flap around, so it'll be a
Uh-huh.
little harder to catch them.
Yeah.
And I can't get them whole out of my thing because it's a little trailer door.
Yeah.
And then, well, we'll figure something out and have to. We'll have to do some. But today is the day. That's it. That they're starting to destroy their house now, and it's.
All right.
I'm
Well, have fun. We're having the same.
it's
We're in the
killing
later
me.
next stage, and we've got to move ours outside next. But we're trying to wait for this
I
ice and snow to go away.
I know. That's why I'm gonna
Yeah.
move my heat lamps down
Yeah.
into that room. I don't know if they can handle. I don't know. I don't know. I'm gonna try to figure out if they can handle the outside. I don't think quite yet, but I can bring those heat lamps in that little shed that I have, so
Yeah.
that might work.
All
But
right. Well,
mm.
thank you very much for the
Okay,
time. We're
great.
going to leave you now,
Okay.
but thanks for joining us. And yeah, we're on our way to make
Okay.
some bread later this
All
week.
right.
Thanks, Richard.
I look forward to seeing some results. Take
All right.
care.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.
All right. So we're just working out some technical difficulties. Okay. Well, let's see, is the audio working now? Okay, I think that the audio might be working now. So, hopefully everybody can see and hear me. Thankfully, there's a lot of friends watching, so they'll let us know, I think, if there's a problem still. Yeah.
Bread is beautiful, but we still don't have any audio.
Okay, we'll give it a second. I think it may be fixed. This is the starter that we were working on yesterday. We're not trying to make bread out of it, but as I was saying, you can touch it and feel it and get a sense of what a wet dough feels like. When we get to the point of kneading this in the future, we're going to be flipping it around and playing with it. So there's no harm in playing with this right now. As Richard said, it's this whole bulk here is providing plenty of food for everything.
Audio's on.
Awesome, audio's working. Got the thumbs up. So as Richard said, this whole thing is providing food, and you can see it's a little bit marshmallowy. It's a little bit jiggly compared to what it was yesterday when we put it down, and that's letting us know a little bit of that has to do with the gluten network, but a lot of that's telling us there's bubbles being built in there, which is great, and that's coming from all the yeast and a lot of bacterias. The other thing I can do is I can smell this. And so it's got a little bit of a fresh dough smell, but it's also starting to smell a little bit sour, and I can taste this. And it's like slightly tangy, but mostly tastes like raw dough. So this is the one that's 24 hours old. We're gonna let this keep going. So we want that to be, depending on the temperature, it might be 2 to 3 days. And I think when I was starting to play around with fresh wheat, one of the big surprises to me was everything you need to make your bread is sitting right there in the wheat. And all you need to do is add water and time. This is the same exact starter mix. This one's 72 hours old. Yes?
Question. Do we have to work the starter between now and tomorrow? Every so many hours?
I'd flip it around a little bit. Yeah, just play with it a little bit. And part of the idea of that is you're mixing everything up. So I would do a little bit of what I just did there. Just play around with it. It's also fun to see what the dough's like. So right here, this is a 72-hour starter. You can see it looks quite a bit different. It's more bubbly than the last one. If I pick it up, it is falling apart in my hands more. So that has to do with the gluten in this. It's a lot of it is being digested and eaten. As I feel down toward the bottom, it's a little bit cakey down there. Now, it doesn't mean there isn't any gluten in this, but it's in a totally different form than it was. And you can see all the bubbles that are coming out as I'm sticking my hand through. So it's very active at this point. This is 72 hours old. It's very active. I'm going to taste a little bit of this. Now, that tastes very sour. It's almost like lemonade in my mouth. It's like very puckery. And it's a nice sour, though. It really is more like a citrus kind of sour. It also has a smell. And I would say it smells like honey, and it smells like a field in the summertime. So it's sort of a straw, honey kind of smell. It smells really, really good, actually. And that's a 72-hour-old starter. So we're going to come back to our starter in a few days, and we'll see how it's doing. But that's what we're looking at. This starter, yes.